I'm Antariksh. I'm a postgraduate student from SOAS University. I just recently completed my degree. And today I'm gonna talk about, well, battling identity negation. So it's like I'm gonna take a look at two particular games from the perspective of post-colonial discourse. So I will read it out because I'm more of a script kind of person. But yeah, so video games obviously have emerged as like one of the dominant forms of media recently. This form of literature, however, currently remains kind of west-centric in its storytelling, thereby becoming an influential soft power vanguard to export like Western capitalist normativity and cultural imposition. The confines of this genre provides the ideal grounds that can be used by diasporic and non-normative communities to express their existence and push back against the tide of assimilation. And therefore, today I'm gonna try and talk about that. Um, Today I'm gonna look at two particular examples: Disco Elysium and Venba. Both stories tackle the themes of erasure of identity, while Venba's titular protagonist faces this threat from contact with foreign culture. Disco Elysium focuses on contact with of competing ideologies. But why particularly post-colonial theory, right? Um, so it is a discourse that forms a valid critical base because we live in a post-colonial and globalized world where the horrors of socioeconomic and racial oppression are yet a recent memory in the collective consciousness of formerly subjugated peoples and cultures. Video games as an art form are not monolithic endeavors, as they are the result of same globalized world that we live in. Development teams consist of hundreds of people spread across thousands of miles, each identifying with different cultures and ideas. Video games as a form of media, therefore, present immense potential in the representation of the subaltern. This potential is limited primarily in two avenues, which I do believe is a necessary digression. The ever increasing price of AAA video games and consoles make it an art form that is not easily accessible to low income countries. On the other hand, the increasing representation of minorities in groups in video games has set off reactionary movements, which has harassed developers of diverse backgrounds by accusing them of promoting politics and a woke agenda. The reactionaries' cry of separating politics from video games is contradictory, however. The wars of Call of Duty, the assassinations of Assassin's Creed, and all the satires of Grand Theft Auto are all political in nature. Be it the post apocalyptic frontiers of Fallout or the anti utopian streets of Bioshock, political discourse forms the foundation for these fictional worlds, rooting them into a logic that fuels the suspension of disbelief. It is therefore important to critique the implications that arise from such political spaces and the people and ideas that the space is shared with. Despite the risks, there have been certain games, there have been a lot of games, in fact, recently that are very inclusive and diverse in nature. Venba is a beautiful example of such a video game set around the struggles of South Indian family trying to find a better life in Canada. The game presents a stage that can be eloquently critiqued with Fanon's contribution to post-colonial discourse. Narratively, Venba's titular protagonist finds herself in Canada with her husband in order to find a better life for her family. Discovering her nascent pregnancy, however, she and her husband are driven into building a more stable livelihood. However, with low job prospects and a cultural shock, the couple find it very, very difficult to realize this stability. Mechanically, the game is simple. The player is tasked to make appetizing South Indian dishes while following the instructions of Venba's cookbook. And it was very hunger inducing, I'm not going to lie, which was a gift from her mother, this cookbook. The narrative and mechanics, when combined with the music from Tamil creative Alpha Something, immerses the player into the struggles of the family. Fanon, in his book, Black Skin, White Masks, elaborated on this feeling of alienation and inferiority driven by the hegemonic colonizer to erase the identity of the colonized and drive assimilation. Venba's dilapidated cookbook progressively becomes more and more intangible, manifesting this erasure and making the cooking process a challenge of intuition for the players. Homi K. Baba, on the other hand, built upon Fanon's work, elaborating upon the concept of mimicry, where assimilation is utilized to establish one's minority culture in a third space. Now, what does that mean? An example with which this can be easily explained is when criticism of the colonizer is done by the usage of the language of the colonizer. Although Venba's story tackles immigration rather than directly being about colonization, the the story is told in English, right? The majority language of Canada. This third space allows people from diverse backgrounds to immerse into the story and attempt to understand the struggles and relate with the struggles that come under the circumstances. Homi Kebaba's third space is the outcome of Venba, while in another game, it functions as one of the primary mechanics. Disco Elysium, winner of the 2019 Narrative Awards, one of my favorite games, also has a very simple premise. Playing as detective Harry Dubois, you are tasked to solve a murder that happened in the city of Revachol, a fictional city that has been torn apart by its own history, while the characters and the overarching narratives fuse to form a more complex experience for the players. We can use post-colonial theory to better understand the world and the opportunities it presents for the development of the protagonist, both from a philosophical standpoint and a gameplay standpoint. Disco Elysium's Revachol remains ravaged by regime changes. Once ruled by a monarch, the crown was deposed by revolutionaries who found themselves in the crosshair of the coalition government that brought the city under its heels. Each shift of paradigm brought with it a change in socioeconomic policies, which is further reflected in the characters you meet. From former fascists who dwell in their deluded nostalgia to socialist students who dream of creating a more egalitarian world. Disco Elysium, it does something very interesting. It shies away from gunplay. It relies on the mechanics of the thought cabinet. Starting from a self-induced amnesia, the protagonist, Harry Dubois, finds himself alienated by the world as it judges him for not knowing otherwise normative concepts, such as currency or inequality. Yet, as the player imbibes the world, they are subject to these diverse ideologies, creating a political space where each idea can be assessed and criticized by way of mimicry. Capitalism is criticized by using capitalist jargon, where Harry pays using imaginary shares with a made up value, while socialism is criticized, on the other hand, by students quarreling amongst themselves to decide how left one has to be to qualify. This discourse is allowed by the aforementioned thought cabinet that, through assimilation, organically molds the protagonist throughout the course of the game. Um, Heidegger once emphasized upon the connection between individuals' identity and the temporal and spatial context within which they have thrown. Both stories that are a thematic exploration of this erasure of identity when people are taken away or like find themselves away from a land that they recognize and in a time that they do not recognize. While in Venba, the protagonist desperately attempts to fight this erasure, Disco Elysium follows a path of rediscovery that comes after it. Um, Thank you.